Hello. Today we're going to start our next story. It's called The Landlady. And hopefully you already have, and if you don't, press pause and do this. You already have folded a paper in half twice to make 4 squares. And you already have the first square completed. I don't know. Let me see if you can see that. You should already have 4 bullet points of facts you recorded about potassium cyanide. There was that little background reading paragraph right up above where you're watching this now. Make sure you have 4 of those bullets. It's really going to help you understand what the landlady's got going on. So make sure that you have those 4 bullet points complete before you continue this video. Then we have our next square. This square, see there, foreshadowing? This square is actually the one that you are going to complete today. So we are going to be on the lookout for foreshadowing examples. That means when the author gives you hints of things that may unfold later in the story. So I want you in this first part to be very observant and looking for things that make you think something's going to come of that. I really feel like that's going to matter. That doesn't seem quite right, because you might decide that several things right now at the beginning are not quite right with the landlady and her bed and breakfast, where she lives and where she houses guests. So I want you to be on the lookout for instances of foreshadowing. We are going to stop at the end of part 1, and I'm going to give you a little bit more instruction, and you're going to record 2 things from the text. Part 1's pretty short, so this isn't going to be a very long video, but I want you to make sure that you follow along in the text that you see on the screen. And then when we get to the end of part 1, the audio will stop, and I'll come back on the screen, and we'll talk about what to get in part 1 square, which is the second square of your chart. So here we go. Start listening and following along with the audio, with the text here, and then we'll stop at the end of part 1 in a couple minutes.
The Landlady by Roald Dahl. Billy Weaver had travelled down from London on the slow afternoon train, with a change at Reading on the way, and by the time he got to Bath, it was about 9 o'clock in the evening, and the moon was coming up out of a clear starry sky over the houses opposite the station entrance. But the air was deadly cold, and the wind was like a flat blade of ice on his cheeks. "Excuse me," he said, "but is there a fairly cheap hotel not too far away from here?" "Try the Bell and Dragon," the porter answered, pointing down the road. "They might take you in. It's about a quarter of a mile along on the other side." Billy thanked him and picked up his suitcase and set out to walk the quarter mile to the Bell and Dragon. He had never been to Bath before. He didn't know anyone who lived there. But Mr. Greenslade at the head office in London had told him it was a splendid town. "Find your own lodgings," he had said, "and then go along and report to the branch manager as soon as you've got yourself settled." Billy was 17 years old. He was wearing a new navy blue overcoat, a new brown trilby hat, and a new brown suit, and he was feeling fine. He walked briskly down the street. He was trying to do everything briskly these days. Briskness, he had decided, was the one common characteristic of all successful businessmen. The big shots up at the head office were absolutely fantastically brisk all the time. They were amazing. There were no shops on this wide street that he was walking along, only a line of tall houses on each side, all of them identical. They had porches and pillars and 4 or 5 steps going up to their front doors, and it was obvious that once upon a time they'd been very swanky residences. But now, even in the darkness, he could see that the paint was peeling from the woodwork on their doors and windows, and that the handsome white facades were cracked and blotchy from neglect. Suddenly, in a downstairs window that was brilliantly illuminated by a street lamp not 6 yards away, Billy caught sight of a printed notice propped up against the glass in one of the upper panes. It said, "Bed and breakfast." There was a vase of yellow chrysanthemums, tall and beautiful, standing just underneath the notice. He stopped walking. He moved a bit closer. Green curtains, some sort of velvety material, were hanging down on either side of the window. The chrysanthemums looked wonderful beside them. He went right up and peered through the glass into the room, and the first thing he saw was a bright fire burning in the hearth. On the carpet in front of the fire, a pretty little dachshund was curled up asleep with its nose tucked into its belly. The room itself, so far as he could see in the half-darkness, was filled with pleasant furniture. There was a baby grand piano and a big sofa and several plump armchairs, and in one corner he spotted a large parrot in a cage. Animals were usually a good sign in a place like this, Billy told himself, and all in all it looked to him as though it would be a pretty decent house to stay in. Certainly it would be more comfortable than the Bell and Dragon. On the other hand, a pub would be more congenial than a boarding house. There'd be beer and darts in the evenings, and lots of people to talk to, and it would probably be a good bit cheaper too. He had stayed a couple of nights in a pub once before, and he had liked it. He had never stayed in any boarding houses, and to be perfectly honest, he was a tiny bit frightened of them. The name itself conjured up images of watery cabbage, rapacious landladies, and a powerful smell of kippers in the living room. After dithering about like this in the cold for 2 or 3 minutes, Billy decided that he would walk on and take a look at the Bell and Dragon before making up his mind. He turned to go. And now a queer thing happened to him. He was in the act of stepping back and turning away from the window, when all at once his eye was caught and held in the most peculiar manner by the small notice that was there. Bed and breakfast, it said. Bed and breakfast, bed and breakfast, bed and breakfast. Each word was like a large black eye staring at him through the glass, holding him, compelling him, forcing him to stay where he was and not to walk away from that house. And the next thing he knew, he was actually moving across from the window to the front door of the house, climbing the steps that led up to it, and reaching for the bell. He pressed the bell. Far away in a back room, he heard it ringing, and then, at once, it must have been at once, because he hadn't even had time to take his finger from the bell button, the door swung open, and a woman was standing there. Normally you ring the bell and you have at least a half-minute's wait before the door opens. But this dame was like a jack-in-the-box. He pressed the bell and out she popped. It made him jump. She was about 45 or 50 years old, and the moment she saw him, she gave him a warm, welcoming smile. "Please come in," she said pleasantly. She stepped aside, holding the door wide open, and Billy found himself automatically starting forward. The compulsion, or more accurately, the desire, to follow after her into that house was extraordinarily strong. "I saw the notice in the window," he said, holding himself back. "Yes, I know. I was wondering about a room." "It's all ready for you, my dear," she said. She had a round, pink face and very gentle blue eyes. "I was on my way to the Bell and Dragon," Billy told her, "but the notice in your window just happened to catch my eye." "My dear boy," she said, "why don't you come in out of the cold?" "How much do you charge?" 5 and 6pence a night, including breakfast." It was fantastically cheap. It was less than half of what he'd been willing to pay. "If that is too much," she added, "then perhaps I can reduce it just a tiny bit. Do you desire an egg for breakfast? Eggs are expensive at the moment. It would be 6pence less without the egg." 5 and 6pence is fine," he answered. "I should like very much to stay here." "I knew you would. Do come in." She seemed terribly nice. She looked exactly like the mother of one's best school friend, welcoming one into the house to stay for the Christmas holidays. Billy took off his hat and stepped over the threshold. "Just hang it there," she said.
Okay, that's where we're going to stop. And you need your charts. So you have your notes on the first square, your 4 bullet points. Now in the second square, this is where we are going to record two examples of foreshadowing. So what I want you to do is think, and you can go back through the text. If you look right below this video, you see I have the pages we just read. So it's exactly the same text that you just listened and followed along with, so you can skim back through there if you need to. Find two places in the text, and you'll list them there. You can use bullet points again. Two places where you feel like there's something up with that. I can tell that that's going to matter later on. Maybe some observations about the landlady, maybe about the house itself. So, what are two foreshadowing examples that you can tell so far in the story? And again, if you need to look back at the text, just look right below and you'll see that the pages are there for you. And that is all. Once you have these two recorded, you are done for today. And we will do part 2, same way, tomorrow.